The first of, you've already heard testimony from experts in the field of libel lawfare. During lunch, you are going to hear firsthand accounts from people directly affected by the phenomenon. So the first speaker who will be talking to you during lunch is Hassan Dayuleslam, and I hope I didn't mangle that too badly. He is a researcher and editor of IranianLobby.com, so if you please welcome him to the podium. Thank you.
It's an honor for me to be here with you. I'm grateful to the Legal Project at the Middle East Forum and to the other sponsors for this opportunity. Professor Dershowitz talked about a guerrilla lawsuit. I think I've been sued by those who I believe work for the King Kong, maybe. So let me explain my story. For the past several years, I have been studying the Iranian regime's lobby in the US. My reports have been largely published by major Farsi websites and some US journals. I have appeared in many radio and TV broadcasts aired to Iran, including Voice of America. Because of writing on this issue, smear attacks and legal scare tactics have been directed against me. This has restricted my freedom of speech, has affected my safety, the safety of my family here in the US, and also my family in Iran. Allow me to tell you how and why I became interested in studying the Iranian regime's web of influence in the US. For almost a decade, we watched then Congressman Bob Ney passionately fighting to ease sanctions and policy against Iran. In 2005, when Jack Abramoff and Bob Ney's corruption scandal became public, I and many other Iranians had a very simple question. Why would a person that so readily makes his services available to the highest bidder so passionately care for the Iranian rulers? During these times, Bob Ney had an Iranian foreign policy advisor in his office. So, why would a lawmaker with no official role in foreign policy have a foreign policy advisor on Iran? This advisor was Mr. Trito Parsi, a young Iranian from Sweden who, according to his own declaration, led a lobbying organization aimed at influencing elected representatives in the US to remove sanctions against Iran. Mr. Parsi is currently the president of the National Iranian American Council, known as NIAC, which is the most active Iranian organization inside US Congress. In April 2007, I published my first English report in an article titled Iran's Oil Mafia Penetrating US Political System, detailing how Mr. Parsi and NIAC have been supported, assisted, praised, and trusted by the Iranian regime. The first reaction to my article came from the governmental press in Tehran. 6 newspapers and websites close to the regime came forward to defend NIAC and accused me of being an agent of New Conservatives, AIPAC, and Israel. The ultra-radical Quds newspaper wrote, "The new cons attack the Iranian lobby in the US." Then Mr. Parsi and his colleagues in NIAC publicly accused me of being a terrorist and a warmonger. Few weeks later, Voice of America Persian Service took interest and sought to organize a face-to-face debate between Mr. Parsi and me. I accepted the invitation, but he did not show up. After the broadcast, NIAC's lawyer sent a hostile and threatening letter to Voice of America, demanding a halt to broadcasting the next scheduled program about NIAC. Voice of America gave in. This is an example of the chilling effect that these threats have on the media. Once this intimidation campaign paid off, NIAC boasted on its website that it had made progress in defamation case against Voice of America. New York, in presenting its own lawyer's letter as if it were a legal action, had a similar impact on other media that had published articles about New York written by myself or by others. For example, Mr. Thomas Lifson, the editor of online magazine American Thinker, declined to publish my new article and wrote to me, "I received news of legal action against Voice of America just prior to publication of your new article. Because our website has no financial resources and we are still in debt, I cannot afford to risk a legal action which would simply destroy us. I wish that I had the resources to fight them back, but I had to not publish your article. I am very sorry." During these times, my main encouragement was the support I received from the Iranian community that opposes Tehran's lobbyists and advocates. Consequently, more and more people have come forward to raise questions and voice their concerns. I was not the first to talk about this issue, and here we have some people who started to talk about New York before me. I was not the first, and there are actually thousands who talk about this issue. New York's final response was to bring a lawsuit against me, which is also intended to silence other like-minded critics. I was not about to choose silence. I hired a lawyer and started to fight back, but after a short time, my financial resources were all gone, and I understood that such an endeavor could not be sustained by me alone. I asked for help. The legal project at the Middle East Forum and the firm Sidley rose up to the challenge and graciously extended a supporting hand. With their legal and financial assistance, I have been able to continue to exercise my First Amendment right and fulfill my duty to expose the truth. In closing, again, I thank the organizer of this briefing, and I express my deepest gratitude to the legal project at the Middle East Forum, which has had the courage and the wisdom, and I insist here, which has had the courage and the wisdom to recognize that the Iranian regime's lobby, its web of influence in the US, poses a real, concrete, and lasting threat to the American national security. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Joe Kaufman, who is the founder and chairman of Americans Against Hate and an investigative journalist for Front Page Magazine. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke Goldstein. Thank you, leaders and associates of the Middle East Forum. And especially thank you, Daniel Pipes, for giving me the opportunity to move forward in the field of counterterrorism. There are those members of the radical Muslim community who wish to silence their opponents via legal means. The goal is to instill fear and to create an undue fiscal burden on those who speak out against them, so that the truth about their dangerous agendas will never reach the public. The following is a quote made by former Member of Congress Walter Fauntleroy, speaking for and defending Islamist activist Mahdi Bray, whose extensive criminal history had just been exposed by the Investigative Project on Terrorism, an organization headed by counterterror authority Stephen Emerson. Quote, "It is high time the type of rhetoric directed specifically at the Muslim community and its leadership by right-wing extremists and so-called terrorist experts stops. I think we can start the beginning of the end by initiating litigation that will force them into financial responsibility for their scurrilous and shameless acts against the Muslim community," end quote. The words are currently published on Bray's personal blog. Mahdi Bray is the executive director of the Mas Freedom Foundation, the political wing of the Muslim American Society, MAS. MAS was established in 1992 by leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, the group responsible for the vast majority of the world's terror outfits. Indeed, the international head of the Brotherhood, Mohammed Mahdi Akef, was amongst the organization's founders. Bray's well-documented support for terrorists, such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader Sami al-Arian, is proof of Hamas's refusal to break from its extremist past. Bray has even traveled to Cairo to defend members of the Brotherhood who were facing military tribunals for their actions against the Egyptian government. When Bray depicts the Star of David, Jewish star, as being the equivalent of the Nazi swastika, or posts photographs of the former Hamas spiritual leader Ahmed Yassin on his group's website in his name, Mahdi Bray's Photos, it is his right to do so, but it is others' right to point it out. However, exposing these facts or Bray's felony rap sheet could result in legal action, frivolous though it may be, initiated by those who seek to bury the truth. This has recently been the experience of this author. In October of 2007, I traveled to Texas to lead a demonstration for the group I chair, Americans Against Hate, in opposition to the Islamic Circle of North America, an organization who I had personally discovered was connected to the financing of the terrorist organization Hamas. The Islamic Circle of North America, or ICNA, was established in 1971 as the American arm of the Muslim Brotherhood of Pakistan, Jamaat-e-Islami. As stated in a press release found on Jamaat-e-Islami's website in August of 2006, the Pakistani group's charity, the Al-Khidmat Foundation, had taken a delegation to Damascus, Syria, to give 6 million rupees, the equivalent of 99,000 US dollars, to the head of Hamas, Khalid Mashal. Mashal, in turn, thanked the group for the money and said that Hamas would use it to continue to wage jihad against Israel. At the time of this monetary transaction, and for a long time thereafter, ICNA was listed on Al-Khidmat's website as its top donor. Actually, its top 2 donors, one representing ICNA USA, the other representing ICNA Canada. I had mentioned this information in an article I had written for a front page magazine in September of 2007. At the end of the piece, I stated that I was flying to Texas to expose this information to the public. The demonstration consisted of roughly 10 people holding signs and a 5 to 10 minute speech that I had made. 20 minutes into the event, I was served with a lawsuit and a restraining order brought against me by 7 Dallas area Islamic organizations who objected to the front page article. One of the groups was the Muslim American Society, who I mentioned before, and 3 of the others are Islamic owned by the North American Islamic Trust, an entity named by the U.S. Justice Department as a co-conspirator for the Hamas financing trial against the Holy Land Foundation and 5 of its leaders. Not one of the 7 groups suing me was mentioned in the article. Again, it was concerning information I had discovered linking ICNA to the financing of terrorism abroad. My allegations regarding this were and are backed up by irrefutable proof. Yet 7 groups who do not like me, who do not like the fact that I work to expose organizations and individuals tied to terror, are suing me, making the false claim that I wrote about them when I did not, and have obtained a restraining order against me when I have never posed a threat to them or anyone else for that matter. Indeed, it is only I that received the threat. On October 3rd, less than 2 weeks prior to the demonstration, an individual posted to the internet the following concerning our Texas demonstration. Quote, "You American bitches disgust the shit out of me. You think you're all cool. I think all of y'all are pansies. Go get a life and focus on your religion that doesn't make sense. There better not be a protest or else," end quote. This information came up in a hearing for my case in February of 2008. While I stated on the stand that the demonstration was the first time I had ever been in Texas, while I stated that I never had any business dealings in Texas, while I stated that I had no family or friends in Texas, and while I proved that there was a threat made against me and my group, the spokesman for the plaintiffs, an ex-board member of the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, named Jamal Kadura, as well as another individual for the other side, testified that never did I nor any of our group threaten them in any way. Unfortunately, though, the judge hearing the case, without providing a reason for doing so, decided to extend the restraining order against me. So right now, since October of 2007, I have had a restraining order hanging over my head. The organizations are suing me for $7, $1 for each group. And while that may seem like a small number, my legal bills as of today have totaled nearly $90,000. This while the case hasn't even gone to trial yet. The goal, much like what Fauntleroy said, is to bankrupt me and shut me up, so that I will never think again about writing about their colleagues, so that I will hide and not speak out against injustice, hatred, and violence. When all is said and done, they will find that I will not be going away, nor should anyone else. We must not allow a small but vocal segment of society the ability to deny us of our rights that we are privileged to have here in America and to a greater extent throughout the Western world. What I and others are going through must be rigorously defended. We cannot afford to let this go unanswered. The groups which attempt to quiet us themselves enjoy their freedoms, but they object to and denounce others who try to exercise theirs. They cannot have it both ways. Our liberties, our freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of expression were paid for with the blood of those who valiantly fought to preserve them. And now that we have our freedoms, we must strive to protect them. That is our right, and that is our duty. Thank you. I just want to end this by saying again, thank you very much to the Middle East Forum, to Daniel Pipes and Brooke Goldstein for helping me with this case and for giving me an opportunity to fight this case. Thank you again.
I'd like to make a brief mention of one of the critical aspects of the legal project at the Middle East Forum, which both Hassan Islam and Joe Kaufman have mentioned. One of the things that the legal project does is provide an escrow account to help support the financial costs of people who are targeted by these lawsuits. We don't make any money from it. We don't handle it at all. We provide that money, along with the assistance of pro bono attorneys, as a critical service because, let's face it, if you don't have the funds to continue a lawsuit, you have already lost. That is the key point that has already been made. Turning to a slightly different problem, I'm going to mention Canada briefly. And you may have already heard a bit about the infamous human rights commissions in Canada, which precisely used this tool. You had a wealthy Islamist organization or individual who found someone speaking that he did not like, and of course filed a human rights complaint against them. Rules of evidence need not apply, rules of procedure, all of these legalisms that we take for granted as protecting our rights can be avoided. However, that is not the only situation that affected the human rights commissions. They also suffered from a blatant case of hypocrisy, as our next speaker is going to address more fully. Marc Lebuis is the president and CEO of Point de Bascule, which translates as tipping point. He's going to explain a bit more about his particular experience with the Canadian Human Rights Commissions that I think you will find fascinating. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much to the Legal Project Middle East Forum for inviting me here and get a little bit of a taste of the North American perspective and getting the reality of Canada into play here. Today's radical Islamic or Islamist threat against Canadian free speech right has some history. Unfortunately, this history is not well known precisely because of the effectiveness of the assault, of the Islamist assault on Canadian free expression. American Islamic Relations CARE and CARE's on the assault, sorry for that. The history began about 7 years ago with mass libel lawsuits against North American media by the Saudi-funded unindicted co-conspirator organization, the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE. In CARE's Canadian chapter, the Canadian Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE-CAN, targeting anyone asking about CARE's known links to extremism, the lawsuit shut down important discussions about CARE, CARE-CAN, and the Islamist threat. Journalist David Frum, the National Post, terror specialist David Harris, and audio radio station CFRA were among Canadian targets, especially under Canada's plaintiff-friendly libel system where no First Amendment exists. CARE-CAN suits silenced the knowledgeable and ensured that no one would speak out against its expanding of contacts with private organization and, shockingly, for a time at least, with some government entities. The silencing paid off. For a while, uninformed, politically correct RCMP, which is the CIA in Canada, the RCMP National Security Outreach officers relied on demonstrably absurd and divisive CARE-CAN studies to brief the public on largely imaginary anti-Muslim bias. Fortunately, for civil rights, by about 2006, disclosure and other obligation associated with lawsuits had backfired on CARE and CARE-CAN, and they gave up on their own suits. Their operative finally figured out that these predatory suits against media were blowing their cover as supposed human rights organization. As Dr. Daniel Pipes put it, CARE and its minions are now out of the lawsuit business. But Canadians are not out of the woods. The same libel law that permitted this abuse continues to operate in Canada, and there is no shortage of radical Islam front groups willing to use it. An example is a lawsuit that has been going on quietly for years against a Canadian counter-jihad organization that exposed the Muslim charities' alleged links to a Middle Eastern Islamist terrorist organization. Few Canadians realize that the charity is also suing a current Canadian cabinet minister, Stockwell Day. And so, few understand that this suit might be interfering with the inclination of this federal cabinet minister and thus the Canadian government to cancel the charity's taxpayer-subsidized charitable status and put the organization on the country's list of banned terror groups. An important new and ominous variation on the Islamist lawfare tune has been the speech policing jurisdictions of Canada's Human Rights Commission system. Government human rights tribunals were originally established in Canada in the 60s to ensure that housing and other basic needs would not be withheld from citizens on ethnic or similarly prejudicial grounds. Sorry for my French. In recent years, however, the mandate of many of these bodies has been broadened to include what is described as hate speech. The proliferating of these bodies, one in virtually every province and territory, plus a federal version, has opened the possibility that Islamists would invoke themes of bigotry and racism to silence discussions and warnings about Islamist and extremist Islam. This became to pass when the radical Canadian Islamic Congress made formal complaints in multitude human rights jurisdictions against Canada's leading magazine, Maclean's, for publishing excerpts from Marc Stein's bestseller, America Alone. Although the Ontario Human Rights Commission dismissed the complaint, it did so with an unprecedented, almost savage attack against the magazine and a number of its articles. This happened without hearings and other due process considerations and caused the moderate Muslim Canadian Congress to accuse the Commission of going to bat for radical Islam. Months later, Point Bascule, or Tipping Point, my organization, convened a Watershed Montreal conference featuring an exclusively Muslim panel. The panel warned of radical Islam's infiltrations of Canada's social, political, and government bureaucratic institutions. Attendees were stunned to hear that 2 of the Ontario Human Rights Commission commissioners, judges loosely speaking, were connected to radical Muslim groups like Canadian Islamic Congress and Canadian Arab Federation. One was said to be an admirer of the Ayatollah Khomeini. Meanwhile, a panelist asserted that the commission staff was penetrated too. Let me assure you, declared the speaker, that the senior policy advisors of the Ontario Human Rights Commission who wrote the document that Commission Chair Barbara Hall signed in the McLean's case is openly supportive of Sharia law, and in fact, he comes to work dressed in Saudi attire. No wonder McLean's couldn't get a fair shake and has recently debased itself by seeking out quotes from Ihsan Gardi, Executive Director of Canada's CARES chapter, presumably as a way of insulating itself from further trouble. The test for human rights system integrity that my organization, Point Bascule, my organization made, Point Bascule, itself made a formal complaint to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. This one about a viciously Christophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-woman, anti-gay book published by a Montreal imam, to the astonishment of a public familiar with notorious Human Rights Commission cases against people of ethnic European Christian and Jewish tradition. The Commission flat out refused to pursue the imam. Media and public were outraged by the obvious conclusion, as we say in French, deux poids deux mesures, double standards, and government-funded and enforced ones at that. This comes in a context. Some are beginning to speak in hushed tones of Canada as an incipient rogue nation. As a Canadian, I hope this is overblown, but there is evidence of a government refusal to come to terms with important sources of instability and radicalism. Even in these recessionary times, for example, Canada's government seeks out new votes through the biggest per capita immigration in the world, several times that of the US, and a refugee system that welcomed Ahmed Rassam, the Millennium Bomber, whose target was Los Angeles International Airport. Thanks to skyrocketing, almost unscreenable intake from terror-plagued countries, French counter-terrorist specialists consider Montreal an international hub of North African Islamist terrorism. Canada even gave a home to Yassin Abu Bakr, formerly Lennox Phillip, a Montreal immigrant and Islamic convert who founded the radical Jamaat al-Muslima in Trinidad and later attempted a coup in the islands. Palestinian Ghazi Ibrahim Abu Mazir from the Middle East made it across the Canadian border and was shot in a Bronx apartment with a bomb at his side. Kuwaiti national and alleged terror link Nabil al-Marab, an FBI most wanted, seems to have moved easily into the US from Canada. Meanwhile, Canadian politicians have reduced immigration requirements. 3 years residence will do it. And dual citizenship means that tens of thousands of people in Hezbollah-ridden South Lebanon and similar enclaves are entitled to settle in Canada anytime. Some even wonder whether leadership aspiration explains why Immigration Minister Jason Kenney, once having enjoyed the confidence of security-sensitive people, decided to appear as a speaker at an event hosted in November by the Canadian arm of the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA, an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation terrorism case. Politicians are not the only problem. A key government-funded Quebec feminist organization, the FFQ, has just started women's rights supporters by suddenly backing the wearing of veils in government and other public institutions. Jamila Ben Habib, Algerian-Canadian author of a Muslim background, says this is a betrayal resulting from mass drives by the hardline Islamist Présence Musulmane organization to take out FFQ memberships. Now radical Islamists seems to be threatening legal action against a website carrying Mrs. Ben Habib's allegations. We must be able to talk honestly and openly about such trends without fear of lawfare, And this is what Point Bascue's mission is, and it is mine. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that Walden's case, along with that of Hassan al-Islam, who you've just heard speak, continues to be heard on its merits rather than decided by bankrupting these courageous men is due to the exceptional pro bono efforts made by Timothy Kepshandy and his team at the firm Sidley Austin LLP, which has to date consisted of over $350,000 worth of pro bono hours freely given. Ladies and gentlemen, as long as there are attorneys in the United States willing to offer their time and efforts to ensure that Americans may speak freely on radical Islam, terrorism, and terrorist funding, matters of critical public concern, then the ultimate goal of Islamist lawfare is thwarted. And so, in recognition of your generous, devoted, and far-sighted efforts to help ensure our continued freedoms, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to present on behalf of the Legal Project at the Middle East Forum the first Legal Project Award to Timothy Kepshandy and your legal team at Sidley Austin LLP, Bradford Berenson, Pete Jensen, Alyssa Gilson, and Kelly Lynch. Thank you. Come on up.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Aaron, Brooke, Daniel Pipes, the MEF, and the Legal Project. Frankly, it's been our privilege and honor to be asked to do this sort of work, and if I could only spend 30 seconds to emphasize the importance of this work, I won't attest any more to the chilling effect, but let me tell you, in the course of representing these two gentlemen in these cases, there are at least 3 or 4 other journalists, bloggers, publishers who have either pulled down websites, refused to publish articles, or have people on their programs because of these threats. But as a testament to the Legal Project's dedication and effectiveness in both of these cases, particularly now in Hassan's case, where, and believe me, Sidley Austin, we're used to large cases. It seemed like a fairly small and easy case. We have 5 people working and devoting a substantial amount of time just responding to discovery requests on behalf of Hassan, involved the review of about 10,000 emails and documents. Unfortunately now, the other side, not having realized that he would be encountering somebody with a lawyer and the wherewithal to defend himself, is now looking at over 50,000 emails and keeps running to the court and whining and complaining and asking for confidentiality orders and protection because he got what he asked for. And it's, I think, a testament to the MEF's effectiveness, and I would encourage any other lawyers out here who can put the time into these sorts of cases when asked to please jump to the defense, because these journalists and bloggers and publishers on the front line are exercising and testing these First Amendment rights for all of us, which I think more than any other of the Bill of Rights quickly atrophy if they're not continually exercised. I mean, I wish that these days wouldn't be necessary, to paraphrase my all-time favorite author, Yogi Berra, but unfortunately, these days are necessary, and they always will be necessary, because without the fine work, and frankly, it's been very inspiring to work with people from Canada and from Iran who really appreciate these rights that we maybe grow a little bit too used to, and put their own financial wherewithal, their family's risk, and their own at stake to protect the rights for all of us. So I, again, thank you for the opportunity to be involved in this very, very important work, and we continue to look forward, and I encourage all of you, if you can donate any sort of time or resources to the Legal Project, please do so. Thank you again.
That concludes the lunch portion of our day, and Timothy, we are so grateful for all the work that Sidley Austin has done. I mean, without people like you, Mr. Dial-Islam really wouldn't stand a chance against NIAC, so thank you so much for your work. Amazing. And we'll see you at 2 o'clock in the larger room.